Um, Everyone, for those who don't know me, my name is Sophie Mitchell. I'm auDA's Chief Communications Officer, and really wanted to extend a big thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Australia Online, Consumer and Small Business Digital Trends in 2025. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today in various parts of the country. I'm here on Wurundjeri lands down in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. auDA also acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people's commitment to innovation and technology over many, many millennia, and it's one we respect and are really pleased to share with people today and extend. I'd also just like to remind our audience that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will provide a copy of that recording after the webinar, so you can on-share it with those you'd like to. All right, so today we've obviously gathered to discuss auDA's Digital Lives of Australians 2025 report. And I'll outline some key findings from the report in a moment. But before I do that, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our two expert speakers who are with me today. We have first up Chandni Gupta. Chandni is the Deputy CEO of the Digital Policy Director at the Consumer Policy Research Centre, which is Australia's only dedicated consumer policy think tank. Chandni has more than 15 years' experience in consumer policy work, and her experience spans the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the OECD and the UN. So absolutely extensive, and we're thrilled to have her with us today. Thanks for joining us, Chandni. And we also have our very own Bruce Tonkin. Bruce is, of course, the CEO at auDA, and he's been a core part of our team since 2017, leading our operations and now, of course, as CEO. Bruce has worked in the domain name sector for a very long time and had many roles across the industry, including serving on the board of ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, for those who are unfamiliar with it. Losing myself. We're really thrilled, of course, to have Bruce here today. But before we jump into discussion with Bruce and Chandni, I'll give a little outline of our report and spend a few minutes just introducing it before we go into questions. And on questions, just a reminder, if you do have any, please keep them locked and loaded. You can drop them in the Q&A chat and we'll come to them shortly. All right, so on to the research. Our Digital Lives research, as those of you who are familiar with it may know, is an annual research project by auDA, and it's one we've been conducting since 2021. So we're really pleased to release this year's report, which is the 5th in its series. And one of the reasons we do this research is because it's a really core area of focus for us, is to unlock the internet's full potential for Australians. And we know that to do this, we need to understand the online experiences of Australians every day. And of course, this research helps us to do that. And we also take great delight in sharing this research as broadly as we can, so with government, with industry, academia, civil society, so that they in turn may use this research to consider and advocate for improvements in digital outcomes for all Australians. So on to our 2025 report. Just a little bit on the methodology. The survey was conducted by speaking to 2,000 Australian adults and 400 small businesses. We also conducted a 3-day online discussion forum, and we held 15 in-depth qualitative interviews with a cross-section of Australians and small businesses. And overall, the research looked at 5 core topics: the value of the internet, AI, cybersecurity, digital identity, and digital skills, because we thought they were the most pressing issues facing Australians online today. So I'll touch on each of those really briefly before we start discussion with Chandni and Bruce on them. So starting first with the value of the internet. The research found that more Australians than ever before rely on the internet to work, and most of them say they couldn't do their job without it. Interestingly, there's been an increase in value. The most marked increase in value has been for workers who live in regional Australia, with 60% now dependent on the internet, and this is up from 49% in 2021. And we also see a similar trend for small businesses, where it's grown from 44% in 2021 up to 51% this year. Okay, so when it comes to cybersecurity, we see that concerns about privacy and data security persist. On the positive side, consumers say that they're more confident taking key cybersecurity precautions, such as creating passphrases instead of just simple passwords. So they're more confident doing that than they were, and they're also more confident in their ability to spot an online scam. Despite this, however, online caution remains high. So 67% of consumers tell us that they avoid certain online activities due to security concerns. And 83% believe cyber criminals are becoming smarter and more sophisticated. And although we see this broad concern amongst amongst the community, amongst businesses, we see their readiness in the cybersecurity space a little bit lacking. Fewer than a quarter or 20% of small businesses have a cybersecurity policy or offer cybersecurity training for their staff. And 1/5 don't spend anything on cybersecurity protections at all. And both of these figures have declined since the research began in 2021. Moving now to digital skills. Cybersecurity is considered the #1 digital skill required in the future, and this is by both consumers and small businesses. And for the first time in our research, we asked people about careers in technology. And what we found is that more men are confident than women when it comes to IT skills and tech roles. Nearly 3/4 of women surveyed believe they don't have the technical skills required for a career in IT and tech, compared to 54% of men. And as we saw reported in the Australian Financial Review today, many women are turned off a career in technology due to the perceived gender imbalance that seems to favour men. All right, and moving now to AI. I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking AI is everywhere, and we all know that Australians have always been leading adopters of technology. So this showed up in our research, showing that AI is now used by a majority of Australians. So 56% of consumers and 64% of small businesses use it. And the top uses for it amongst consumers and small business are finding answers to questions and solving problems. So this increased use of AI has also led to a growing demand for stronger regulatory safeguards, with 64% of consumers saying they feel these are needed. So some changes there. And then finally, we looked at digital identity, as I mentioned, and this was looked at for the first time in the Digital Lives series this year. And when we talk about digital identity for this research, what we are talking about is a secure system for verifying online identity. So it's not just having a digital driver's license, but it's an online method for, as I said, confirming your identity that doesn't require physical documents. And so it reduces the need to repeatedly share documents like your passport and bank statements, or being asked for that 100 points of ID. So what the research found was that 34% of Australians say they have a digital identity, but 14% say they're unsure if they have one at all. And interestingly, government seem to think that more Australians have it than Australians say they have. So the government actually estimates that half the Australian population have a digital identity. So this indicates to us that there's a bit of confusion out there about digital identity. And so perhaps there is a lack of awareness about what it is, with 31% of respondents saying they didn't even know about digital identity before this survey. So we can see that building awareness and understanding of digital identity systems will likely support broader adoption within Australia. And in turn, this could support better data privacy by reducing the need for Australians to share information with providers each time to validate identity. So that is a super speedy walk through our report. Of course, if you haven't already, you can delve deeper into our report by checking the report itself. It's on our website, and I think one of my colleagues dropped it in the chat there, so feel free to check it out. I know our panelists have read it with great interest, and so without further ado, we're going to jump now into our discussion. But before that, just a very quick reminder, if you've got any questions for our panelists about any of the findings that I just read out and their views on them, or if you've read the report about any other elements at all, please get your questions ready and drop them in the Zoom Q&A tab. But Janni, I might begin with you, if I may. There's obviously quite a lot to unpack in that report, and I just touched on a few small samples really quickly there. But if we have a think about your career, a lot of it's obviously been focused on improving consumer outcomes. And I just wanted to ask you whether there was a finding in the report that struck you as particularly surprising, or that perhaps reveals a crucial opportunity for policy development in Australia, if you can share that with us.
Thank you, Sophie. And firstly, I have to say congratulations to you, Bruce, and the team at auDA for the release of the research, which as a researcher, I skipped a beat when I heard you say it's 5 years of year-on-year data. That is just incredible that you have that. For me, one stat that really stood out, not because it was surprising, but that it put a real number to what we have all been suspecting, that 99% of Australians state that internet adds value to their lives. And that stat clearly highlights that being online is no longer a luxury. It's very much a service that's essential for Australians to rely on to do their day-to-day, to go about their day-to-day lives. So not having good access to connectivity and products and services online is very much going to impede a person's quality of life, because so much of what we do is now online and so much of what we access is digitally enabled in some way. So it's almost like we need to really start thinking of accessing products and services online and the online ecosystem overall as an essential service, and treat it with that lens, and apply some of the same principles that are applied to things like utilities and telcos. So that's things like accessibility, affordability, safety, inclusiveness, reliability, redress even, because having that safe and meaningful access online is now, it really is up there with services like utilities and telco. So I think one of the things that will come up now over the next little while is, if we don't apply that essential services lens, what we are going to see is more of a digital divide like never before, and a bigger gap in the haves and haves not. So it's very much now to think about how we support all Australians to have a really fair, safe and meaningful experience online.
Thanks, Janni. And I think that extends to skills as well. Even if you have the access, if you don't have the AI skills, then you're likely to get left behind in this next evolution of tech skills as well. Thank you for sharing that. Bruce, I might turn to you. So if just reflecting on auDA's new strategy, a core pillar is trust. And that's both trust in the .au domain, and we also look to grow Australians' engagement in the digital economy and society. I just wanted to ask you, what finding in the report do you see as important to help build digital trust for Australians so that they can harness the full benefits of the internet?
Yeah, I think there was two aspects that stood out for me with respect to trust. One was the low recognition that people had digital identities. And I think that's because we have so many of them. So the government has a digital identity to access government services. When you access banking, the bank issues you effectively a set of credentials, username, passwords. If you're interacting with a phone supplier, or particularly trying to get a new phone, you have to validate yourself. So I think people don't see themselves as having a single digital identity, but many. And I think part of the challenge is that one, I think we get frustrated that each time we go to a new provider, we have to now provide passports and driver's licenses and copies of electricity bills and things. And where that might have happened once when you're opening a bank account, the old 100 points of ID, we're now having to do that for a lot of online services. And then people are concerned about what happens to that data once you've supplied it. And I think the Optus data breach a couple of years ago highlighted that, wow, I used my passport to get a mobile phone, but I never expected that data was going to be stored and could be used by someone else. So I think there's a need for digital IDs that are able to be used widely, but the actual data behind those digital IDs is very securely stored. The other thing that jumped out to me a bit was sort of a small business approach to security, in that I think there's high awareness that cybersecurity is an issue. And there was another stat, I think, that individuals feel that they're fairly good at spotting scams and things, but small businesses don't realise that they themselves can be targeted. And I was thinking of an analogy on that, and it's a little bit like if you're imagine you're a single stalk of wheat in a field of wheat, and you could say, well, look, I'm pretty safe because there's a huge tree down at the end of the block, so the farmer's not going to worry about me. I'm just one strand of wheat. I'll just go after the big tree down the end because there's obviously valuable wood in it. Forgetting the fact that there's a mechanical harvester that's just going to go and sweep through the entire piece of land. And that's what happens with cybersecurity, is they're basically running electronic harvesters, and they'll just pick up any small business that's got a vulnerability automatically. They're not looking, farm's not looking for a single blade of wheat, it's just looking to harvest the field. And that's what cyber criminals are doing. And so that need for small businesses to be really aware and strengthening their security, and therefore protecting their customers' data.
Thanks, Bruce. Yes, absolutely critical in the digital world in which we all live and operate in. I think I was alarmed to see how many of my passwords had been compromised recently in my little Apple check-in. Definitely recommend people doing that if they haven't already, and change your passwords regularly. Okay. Chandni, I'm going to jump back to you. You recently conducted and completed a Churchill Fellowship. Congratulations to you too. That could be a topic of a whole nother webinar, I believe, but focusing on the research today, I know you looked at the concept of trust as part of that fellowship, and deceptive design. What are some of the levers in an online experience that can help build trust, and what are some of the actions that can erode it?
Thanks, Sophie. So as part of my fellowship last year in looking into deceptive and manipulative design and how it impacts well-being, this concept is also known as dark patterns. So it's, basically design features that are built into our websites and apps purely to steer our decisions online, and they can impact our well-being, they can impact our time, finance, privacy, the whole gamut. So as part of my fellowship, I met with over 70 experts in 70 countries, and really wanting to learn, well, how are other countries dealing with this, and how are other advocates and businesses thinking about it? And it was interesting, trust and well-being kept coming up as hand in hand. And just to give you an example, so when I talk about deceptive design, I'm talking about things like, subscriptions that are hard to cancel, pre-ticked options, which mean you end up sharing more of your data with more people, and false hierarchies, which means the business's preferred profitable option is put up front and center, and other options in grey are in tiny, tiny font. And you're right, Sophie, we could have a whole other webinar, and there was one. There was one a couple of months ago. And but through this, I met some organizations who are actually making a really conscious decision to compete on trust instead of tactics. So businesses who are using behavioral insights, which many businesses do, but they're using it to not see where they can trip up their customers, but where they can really understand the customer experience and pivot to make that experience a really positive one. And this could be anything from reducing the friction where a customer has made a decision like, I need to cancel, and make that as seamless as possible, And then also thinking about putting in positive friction, where we know that if it was too seamless, it may lead to an unintended decision, and that's not in the best interest of the customer. But these organizations, when I spoke with them, whose ethos is actually built around customer-centric trust, they actually know that they could probably make a lot more money in the short term if they flip the equation and they put tactics over trust. And that highlights a real gap in how our digital economy currently operates, where trust isn't as incentivized in the short term as revenue is. So in terms of there's three ways that we've seen where consumer trust in the online services can truly deteriorate, and these are often known as lock-in effects. And there's three kinds. One is a technical lock-in, where you're restrained by the tech that you're using because there's very little interoperability, and like moving platforms is going to be a huge onus and burden for you as a consumer. And then there's service-based lock-in, which is that you're locked in by the platform you engage in because that's where your community is, or it's also due to the lack of competition that it's the only way you can access a service. Or there's a legal lock-in where you're bound by the terms and conditions set by a business, and then there's no escape route for the customer. So often you hear about organizations building trust or rebuilding trust when things go wrong. And so for consumers, when they hear the word trust, it can be seen as a bit of a buzzword or a band-aid solution, especially when they're getting caught by these lock-in effects on a daily basis. So we know that for consumers, to really thrive, we need to incentivize more businesses to see trust as a long-term mindset and not a makeover, because it does take a lot more than those, to look beyond those short-term profitable gains to then go actually in the long term, I'm creating real customer value and creating happy parts for my customer, which will lead to happier parts for the business as well.
That's right, Jandy, and more likely return business and the likelihood to advocate to others on their behalf as well. So some really good call outs there for business, but also some things for consumers to be aware of. You keep an eye out for those dark patterns. Thanks, Jandy. All right, Bruce, we're going to turn back to you now. And you touched on it briefly in your previous response when you were talking about cybersecurity being a key element of trust. But what we see in the report is some somewhat contradictions in a way, where we hear that small business are really concerned about cybersecurity, yet we see only 20% of them have a cyber policy, and few of them offer staff training, and that these figures are actually declining since our research began, since 2021. So I guess I just wondered if you had any views on why you think that might be the case, and what businesses might be able to do to help sort of rectify this state, and what's auDA doing as well? Are we doing anything to help small business out in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I think the why, I think, is people don't feel that they'll be targeted, because a lot of the media highlights really big companies. So you hear about Optus and Qantas and you think, well, they're really big targets. I'm not worth as much as them, so why target my business? It's interesting, though, if you contrast that with physical security, you wouldn't see a small business that had, say, expensive equipment, just assuming, well, they're only going to try and knock off the bank down the road. I don't need to worry about, I can just leave all my tools sitting out in the yard and not worry about it. Whereas small businesses know that they are the targets of theft, amongst other things. And so a typical small business will do the basics. They will make sure that they have a fence around their physical location. They'll make sure that they lock the gates. Many of them will invest in CCTV cameras, and a lot of that's pretty affordable. And so they're quite simple things you can do around physical security. And there's the equivalent for online security as well, which is one is to make sure when you're using services that are online, like online accounting systems like MYOB or QuickBooks, etc., that you turn on all the security features available. So it's a bit like saying, I've got a lock for the gate, but I never bother to use it. Most businesses wouldn't think of just leaving their gates unlocked, especially if there's a lock available. And likewise, a lot of these online applications, there are locks available, which is in the electronic world is two-factor authentication. So just turn it on. It doesn't cost anything, but can add a huge improvement in security for the business. The other thing is if you've got phones and devices, just make sure you set them to automatically update their software. And with phones, turn them on and off frequently, because that sort of clears any software that might be running in memory. So there's a series of simple things you can do, and the Australian government's got excellent advice, what they call the Essential 8, that are low cost for businesses to implement. In terms of what auDA's doing, one of the things that we have been focusing on is trying to reduce the number of sites that are used for phishing campaigns, so where they're trying to masquerade as another organisation. We find in Australia some of those sites are what we call maliciously registered, so there's a criminal that's gone and registered the domain name. We check domain names within the first 24 hours of their existence and look for patterns where we can see it looks like cyber criminals have tried to register a name, and then we'll remove that name. But the other thing we see is a lot of small businesses that have websites have been hacked because they're running an old version of software. And so when we detect that, we notify the small business and their supplier, and we work with them cooperatively to both first remove the offending content, like a copy of a banking website that's built embedded in their website, so get rid of the bad content. And then the next step is to update the software so that they can't get hacked again.
That's great. Thanks, Bruce. Some really helpful tips there. And I think our membership team might also like me to add that our membership, which it's free to join as an auDA member, we do often run webinars with cybersecurity sort of workshops for small business members. And we also have a member portal, which contains a number of e-learning modules, some of which are on cybersecurity as well. So if you're a member, please check those out. And if you're not a member, you can, of course, join at any point. All right, now, Chandi, I'm going to move back to you now. But sort of looking at the security theme, we see that 73% of Australians are using multi-factor authentication in this most recent report, which is a really big jump from 55% last year. And we're also seeing more providers actually mandating that, which obviously highlights the importance of this as a security feature. But with this in mind, I just wanted to ask you, how important is a secure by design approach when it comes to protecting end users in technology?
Those stats were actually such a great example of the benefits of security by design, where technology comes to you instead of placing the onus on individuals to go and seek or take up a role of a cybersecurity expert in their spare time for themselves to feel safe. When you see businesses implementing security by design principles such as multi-factor authentication, it really helps to confirm that keeping consumers safe is being prioritized by that business. And it goes back to our conversation earlier on building trust. It's just one of the blocks that really helps the consumer feel like they are very much part of the picture as opposed to an adjunct to the business model. Security by design basically inherently means that it should be easy to set up, which multi-factor authentication is, and it's almost universal in its approach to setting up, which means if you've done it a couple of times, you know exactly what it looks like, you know exactly how it feels like, you know the time it will take, and it's done. So we're now seeing, and I think even like our local fitness center also has multi-factor authentication on its for its app. So we're seeing like the basic of the basic businesses using it, which is great. I think one thing to consider is how this technology is being rolled out more widely, especially where the risk and impact of unauthorized access is high. And one particular example we've been looking at is banks, for example. So some of the banks have actually rolled out multi-factor authentication already, which in fact, one of the big banks has only just now, rolled it out just a few weeks ago, which is great. But there are actually still many financial institutions that have not rolled it out at all. So it really is about thinking, well, this is just that one example of why it's so critical that security by design, it should become the norm for a business and not the exception.
Yeah, thanks, Chandni, and particularly for those services that we use so frequently, like banks, and in which we obviously place a lot of value. Okay, moving to Bruce, and I think we'll just stay with cybersecurity because it's such an important issue. And as Bruce, you've already touched on some really big data breaches that have occurred recently, so that definitely draws our attention to them. But one of the other things the research found was that while 89% of small businesses and 87% of micro businesses, so micro business is a business with fewer than 4 employees, they have about one formal cybersecurity practice in place. However, when it comes to sole traders, so that's obviously just a single person, only 44% of sole trader businesses have a formal cybersecurity practice in place. But Bruce, I just wanted to ask you, how do you think industry can support businesses of all sizes, but certainly ensure that sole traders aren't left behind in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think a lot of it touches on what Chandni had suggested. One is sort of security by design, and a lot of sole traders, they're not typically running their own IT services, for example. Mostly these days, people use software as a service or software available online. So they're doing their accounting online, they're doing their banking online. Their sort of customer management and invoicing systems are all online. So not really running anything on premise. But I think the main thing is that most of these online tools have got security features built in, but that sole traders don't turn on. And I think the benefit that businesses that supply these services to sole traders is really have them all turned on by default. So have it switched around so you have to actually go into the complicated menus to turn something off rather than turn something on. And so by default, all the security measures should be turned on to protect those sole traders.
Thanks, Bruce. I know that would be helpful in my house, particularly with my older parents who I spend a fair bit of time with as their tech support, which is a scary thought for anyone who knows me in technology. All right, Janya, I'm going to move back to you, and we're going to move off cybersecurity just for a moment at least, and onto the topic of AI. So the report this year said that 64% of consumers would like to see stronger regulatory safeguards around AI. I just wanted to ask you, what sort of regulation, what would that look like? What sort of regulation do you think would be important to provide people with protections in the AI space, or the most important if government chose to go down this path?
So when I actually saw this statistic, it really didn't surprise me, especially when coupled with another stat in the report that more than 60% surveyed either were not sure or did not feel that companies who are using data to train AI models have appropriate safeguards in place. So it's very much in line with research we've done previously, where we found that only 15% of Australians feel businesses are actually doing enough to protect their privacy. And 9 in 10 Australians expect businesses to protect people's information from being used in ways that leaves them worse off. If you think of privacy protections being the foundation of protections that other technologies such as AI need to account for, then it's actually really clear why Australians are nervous. We need our laws to hold businesses accountable for how they collect and use our personal data. Our current approach to privacy, which dates back to the 80s, and it predates internet in Australia. So it isn't up to scratch to what is actually happening right now in the digital economy or what is actually coming for us. That particular approach to privacy relies on consent and notification. And what that does, it actually leaves consumers to do all the work instead of expecting businesses to meet basic standards of safety and care. And I think it's actually even bigger than just having the privacy laws uplifted and potentially specific AI laws put in place, but it actually goes bigger than that, than just having laws. What the Digital Lives Survey and what our research points to time and time again is that actually Australians deserve not only laws that protect them, but then also regulators that have the power and resources to proactively enforce the laws, and that people actually have access to support when things go wrong. We've found that more than half of Australians don't know where to go when they've had a cybersecurity issue or privacy issue. They actually don't know where to go to seek help. So we need to really look at that ecosystem in its entirety from a safety lens if we want more Australians to feel more confident in this space. I actually really liked the swim between the flags analogy that the eSafety Commissioner used recently when she spoke at the National Press Club about online safety. And she noted, that it's really not about limiting the use of tech, just like it's not about avoiding the ocean. That's not what we want to do, but ensuring that there are guardrails in place and clear digital flags. And that's what regulation can do. It sets the guardrails so innovation benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Thanks, Shamini. It's a really good point there, and certainly an area of policy we'll be watching with great interest in coming months and doubtless years as well. Bruce, back to you for one last question before we will throw it over to the audience. And just a reminder to our audience to please, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. All right, Bruce, sticking with AI, because it's such obviously a hot topic. What do you think we can do to help consumers and small businesses capitalise on it and to reach productivity gains, which is obviously also a topical issue this week, particularly in Canberra? Have you got any suggestions for us?
Sure. Yeah, certainly a very hot topic, Sophie. It's I think AI is best sort of treated that you would if you had an assistant. Whatever job or profession you're in, think about if you had a junior assistant, a raw graduate, what would you ask them to do? And you might ask them to do some research or to summarize how to do a recipe, etc. But you're probably not going to sort of give it to your son or daughter and say, look, I've got a bit of pain in the chest. Can you just look up how to do heart surgery? And here's a kitchen knife. There's still a need to actually engage with experts and check the information. One, I think the challenges is AI doesn't make it easy. It gives very good, concise answers that I guess look very believable and credible. But because AI is just pulling information from many different sources, not all of those sources are reliable. And so it's sort of using AI to find information about a topic, but always verify that information before you use it for significant decisions. And I was just playing with AI as we're speaking, and so I asked it, is Texas really that big? And the answer came back with, yes, Texas really is that big. Obviously there's a lot of material on the internet that says Texas is really big, but we would say to an Australian child at school, well, it's tiny compared to the size of Australia. And so while there are pieces of information about Texas, and especially information written by Texans, will basically say it's the biggest place in the world. But you do need to sort of validate that against verifiable information. And that's one of the benefits that domain names have, in that you could ask information about, say, government services, and it will give you a good succinct answer and sort of give you an idea of what services might be available for an aged person or a young person. But to get the authoritative information, you should then check that against an authoritative site. And in the case of government information, that's likely to be a gov.au domain name. And if you're asking for information that's perhaps related to the not-for-profit community, then someone that has org.au as their domain name is more likely to be providing valid information than just a generic AI bot.
That's great. Thanks, Bruce. And I think there was another interesting case reported this week in the media about a lawyer who got caught using AI in their court filings. So yes, I think it was a really good reminder to all of us while you can use AI as an assistant, definitely worth double checking, and it probably won't replace too many sort of knowledge jobs in the immediate future. All right. So we do have a few questions from our audience, and thanks to our audience for sending them through. Please keep them coming. But I might just throw to the first question. And Chandni, it's for you, although Bruce, very happy for you to weigh in on it as well. And it goes to the gender gap in technology careers that we touched on earlier. And the question relates to the fact that this may mean that digital products don't necessarily meet the needs of the whole community if they're being developed by just one segment. So the question to Chandni is, how can underrepresented groups get more involved in technology to help shape digital products and services?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's so fun because years and years ago when I did IT, I actually thought that by now we wouldn't have this question being asked, and yet here we are. Well, in CPRC, we have a saying for our research, nothing about us without us. And we follow that mantra to ensure that when we are researching about particular consumer groups or we're designing research or policy for particular groups, that we make sure that they're part of the research design process, the policy shaping that will take place. And the same goes here. If we want tech to be accessible and inclusive for all, we need to ensure that there's inclusive pathways that are designed for many and not just a select few. And it means that there will have to be different pathways for different groups, and it isn't a one size fits all. It's 2025, and still when I sit in some policy roundtables or forums in the digital space, I may be the only woman, or maybe one of like two, and many times I'm actually the only person of colour. So yet we know that Australia is far more diverse than that. I think we just have to be really mindful that a narrow perspective is only going to deliver narrow solutions. And we have so much evidence in the AI space where there is so much bias that is already baked into AI models, including examples that I have personally experienced and have been able to compare of how different it can be for example, for a woman, for a person of colour. So without diversity around the table, that risk of bias is continually going to be baked in, and that means we will have groups of people who will become invisible at scale. And I think this is where, when you've got security by design, we probably also need to be thinking about diversity by design. What does that actually mean when as an organization, you're developing products and services? Are you designing it just for the main mass majority, or are you designing it for everyone? It's harder to design for everyone, but it's far more meaningful and goes back to the long-term ideal of building trust. It's far more meaningful if you're designing it with all in mind, especially if that's a product you want everyone to be using and seeing. So that's perhaps where we need to be now starting to think about.
Thanks, Chandni. That's definitely throwing down a challenge to business there, with diversity by design. Bruce, can I just check in with you whether you have anything you might like to add, whether it be about diversity or just gender imbalances in the tech sector?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of things. I think one is that companies in the tech sector need to consciously recruit to ensure they have diversity on their design teams, so that the teams that are actually designing critical software for end users have people from a wide range of groups. So that's sort of diversity in design, if you like. As users, I think the more people can actually provide feedback on the tools to the tools developers. So it's a bit like you go to a hotel and you get asked a whole bunch of questions when you come back as to, whether you like the check-in experience and was the room clean, etc. But a lot of tech tools have got feedback mechanisms as well. And really encourage people that encounter something that doesn't meet their needs to provide that feedback.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. All right, moving on to another audience question now. It jumps back to the very hot topic of cybersecurity. So the report obviously noted that most Australians feel confident in spotting a scam, but the question relates to, is there a risk that this will lead to overconfidence and a reduction in vigilance? And what can we do about that to ward against it? And Chandni, I might throw to you. And again, Bruce, if you have anything to add, we'll turn to you after that. Chandni.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Well, look at this question. Like, there's two things here. The stat is quite high, but I really don't think that Australians are complacent. In fact, if anything, given the data breaches, and Bruce mentioned a few of them earlier, that we've actually experienced as a nation together in the last couple of years has only raised more alarm bells. So when we're discussing the issue of scams, with other consumer organisations who have financial counsellors, such as the Consumer Action Law Centre, Financial Counselling of Australia, the stories that those financial counsellors are hearing are horrendous. And it was reported that just last year, Australians lost $2.74 billion to scams. So it's a really high number for, I think, anyone to be complacent, and I certainly don't think Australians are. The second is that there's the scams we know, which obviously get reported quite widely. You see them all the time, but then more and more as technology gets better, and this came up in the report as well, about the scams becoming more sophisticated. The scams are going to continuously evolve, and so it actually can't just be about consumers being well versed in the scams that are coming, but ideally as the ecosystem, we need to think about how are we stopping those scams in the first place to ever make it through to an individual. And it's why organisations such as the Consumer Action Law Centre, who run the National Debt Helpline, they note that while the new scam prevention framework that came in earlier this year, it's a big step up, but it means scam victims will still have to navigate a really complex pathway to prove that they're actually due compensation. So certainly when it comes to consumer organisations, there's definitely no complacency. And when we're talking to consumers, while they're becoming more vigilant, there is still that nervousness that remains. And then it goes really back to, well, how much is our businesses accountable for to put those security by design measures in place and to ensure that a lot is stopped. But those that get through, how are businesses ensuring that they've got the support mechanisms? If we look at things like, even Optus was one example, even the Qantas examples, the emails that people got was just, it's happened. And that's really it. There wasn't well, what does that actually mean for you? How can you get help? Or we've set up a special number so you can talk if you feel like something has happened or you need support due to this. It's because at the moment, the only requirement is that they notify, then that is all they're doing. And those emails are, yes, we're really sorry it happened. Yep, it happened. We're really sorry it happened. So I think it's a whole mindset shift. It's almost like we need to think about it like in crisis communications or when a crisis occurs, where's the support mechanism? Do we need to set up a separate helpline? Do we need to have other supports in place? What does this actually mean? And then how do we evaluate our system so it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, thanks, Chandni. It's a great three-pronged approach. It's not just in individual and business vigilance, but also in that security by design and that support at the other end, should we need it. So as many people say, it's probably an if and not when that every business will go through such an incident, or every individual. Bruce, did you have anything to add on that front? If you don't, I have another question.
Well, one thing on the question about confidence, I think people have overconfidence. We know, for example, that we run phishing tests and we run it for our staff. A lot of tech companies do. And so this is basically you're testing staff that are already pretty knowledgeable of scams, and those staff still get picked up by it. And the reason for that is people get distracted. So yes, a skilled person can detect the scam if they're looking at things carefully, but often you're in a hurry. You're trying to get out of the office at the end of the day, or you're trying to get something approved at the end of the day. And the scams get much better at taking into account context. So if it's sort of towards the end of the financial year or around tax return time, people, you get the email saying you've got a $1,000 tax return, click here to get it. It's like, oh yeah, I deserve that. Or if you're looking at the Qantas scam, that gets lots of publicity. Then you get an email saying we've detected some unusual activity on your frequent flyer account. You better log in and check for us. So it's in the context that you're conceived that this email is for you and it is legitimate, because I just heard about Qantas yesterday, and now I've got an email today that must be related to that. So they're getting better, and a lot of them are now AI driven. So there's the old things that you could pick a scam up because there'd be lots of spelling mistakes and things. That's gone. AI makes sure that there is no spelling mistakes. It really does look like a perfect replica of a legitimate email. So there's overconfidence. And then reduction in vigilance, I think, it definitely is an issue, because you've just got to be constantly alert and really, be very careful on clicking through a link. Check, if you get an invoice and the numbers change that the bank account you're supposed to pay, ring up and check. Don't assume the information is correct.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, vigilance is certainly critical. So we probably have time for one or two more questions. So just a reminder, if anyone else has any more questions, to please send them through. But I do have one from one of our audience members here. I think I'll throw it to Bruce in the first instance here. Our audience member notes that the report shows that there's a big gap between small businesses' threat awareness and their preparedness. Indeed, it's marked. And they ask, is the main barrier for small business the cost of security tools or the lack of practical know-how and trusted support? Now, Bruce, you may not have all the answers to that, but interested in your views. And in particular, whether we think there might be a metro or regional difference and how we can help.
I think there definitely is a lack of practical know-how, and the more we can just say there's some simple things you can do that really don't cost, like turning on two-factor authentication doesn't cost anything, and most sort of online services provide that. So there's that practical know-how. Definitely you can invest in sophisticated systems, but that's mostly if you're running your own software and building your own systems yourself, which small businesses generally not. And yes, high-end security technology that banks and others use is expensive. But I think mostly for small businesses, it's just the practical know-how. A bit like you don't have to be a lock specialist to basically lock your office at the end of the day.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, Chania, I think we might close out with one last question for you. I have a question about the diversity by design principle that you articulated, and about sort of how you can implement that without appearing to be tokenistic. So the question sort of notes that tokenism might be on the increase, particularly by big business. So yeah, do you have any advice for people about how they can do this with authenticity and with practical impact?
Certainly not an expert, and certainly the diversity by design is just something I said while we were talking about security by design, but I'm glad it's stuck. It's a great question, Don. I think one of the things that we really need to be mindful of, if as a business, if this is your approach forward, it's about leading with purpose and not for optics. So why is it that you're doing it in the first place? Are you doing it so it makes you look good? Or are you doing it because you genuinely care about making sure that there are many voices, not particular voices, in your design? It's It's not just about having where there is a representation. I think it looks tokenistic when there is just we've done it here, done, tick. It's actually about when you're doing, say, behavioral research, or you're testing a new product or service. Are you just taking whoever's available? Are you actually making a real effort to ensure that there is a diversity in the audience that you're testing it with? And that I've seen it come up when we are trying to do fieldwork for particular cohorts, where we will get from those particular market research companies who we engage to get the sample that we need. We design everything else to get the sample, and they'll say, "Oh, it's just too hard. Sorry, it's just too hard." And I think this is where there's a decision there. Is it too hard so we just won't do it, or is it we need to look at another way? And I think those are the kind of questions. So if you are really transparent about why you're doing it, what outcomes you're hoping to achieve, and that it's almost like where you're saying, but we want to share the power, as opposed to holding it in here and holding the control. So it is very much more of a mindset, as opposed to the ticking off the boxes. And I think if you go with that, but there are many more experts who'd be able to speak far more eloquently about this, but that's what I'll say for now.
Thanks so much, Tanya. We appreciate your views. We have just a few moments left. I just wanted to throw to Bruce just to see if you had any last minute tips or observations for our audience before we close out, Bruce.
Yeah, look, I think we firstly value our members that have joined this call, and certainly appreciate you getting the message out to other colleagues that you might work with on some of the information that we found in the Digital Lives research. So share the research widely. And in many ways, we see our members as being sort of like cyber ambassadors to inform people on what simple things they can do to protect themselves. So some of the messages from this call, turn on two-factor authentication, ask people's opinions, encourage feedback from people from diverse backgrounds when you're designing things. And don't just take the information you get from AI at face value, but be prepared to verify it as well, and verify it against trusted sources such as sort of GovAU and auDA and ComAU websites.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bruce. Chandni, at the risk, we don't want to run over time, but I will just check in whether you had any last minute recommendations or advice for the audience as well.
Oh, I'll be really quick. I think the Digital Lives report, it really shows us what and how things are happening and what the experience actually looks like. But I think now we need to take those learnings and go, well, how does that actually translate in day to day? What is the experience feel like? How does it degrade? How does it improve? And really think of from a digital well-being sense. And that's not mental health load, but thinking about, well, are all the accessibility aspects there? For example, I think I talked about before with essential services. So you have, is the accessibility, is the explainability, is it safe, is it meaningful, is there redress when things go wrong? I think now we need to take these learnings from this wonderful report and see how we can apply it day to day in the products and services that are developed online.
Thanks so much, Chandni. And with that, we are at a close. So I really wanted to extend an enormous thank you to Chandni and Bruce for their time today and delivering their expertise. Thank you so much. Big round of applause. You can't hear it, but the audience are clapping with me. I also want to say thanks, of course, to our audience for joining and asking some really great questions. Of course, we just skimmed the surface today. So if you haven't already, please do take the opportunity to download download the report and have a read. And I'm sure there are people you may wish to share it with too. And as Chandni said, strike up that conversation about how we can actually use it to move forward and potentially change some policy settings that will support Australians online and help grow our digital economy. And for those who aren't members, and Bruce obviously just touched on it there, you can also join, and I think a colleague's going to drop the link in the website in the chat. Feel free to join. Members get sort of a heads up on our research, such as Digital Lives. They get to read it first before many others, and also get invited to special webinars and online security training and so forth. So if you think it may be of interest to you, please check it out. It's free to join. So thank you again from auDA. Thanks to Bruce and Chandni and our audience, and we really look forward to you joining us again next time. And if not between now and next year's Digital Lives, we look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, everyone.
Congratulations, auDA. Bye.
Thanks, Chandni.
Bye all.
Bye.